Imagine this. You lock eyes with a stranger across a crowded cafe. The moment arrests time. Something primal and ancient stirs inside you. You've never met them, at least not in this life. Yet your soul whispers, I know you. It doesn't make rational sense, but it never needed to. In that heartbeat, logic bends, space shrinks, and the veil of the everyday lifts. Why does this happen? Why, out of 8 billion people, does one presence feel like a secret you've been keeping from yourself? Love is not merely a connection. That word, connection, feels too clinical, too tidy, as if we are routers sending compatible signals. Love is messier, deeper, older. Love, in its truest form, doesn't just happen. It calls across lifetimes, across chaos, across pain. It defies psychology's need to label, biology's insistence on reproduction, and society's insistence on utility. This is where the mythic and the real converge, in the terrifying suggestion that love might not be about compatibility, but inevitability. Carl Jung once proposed the idea of the anima and animus, the unconscious inner feminine in man, and the inner masculine in woman. He believed we do not simply fall in love with another person. We fall in love with what they awaken in our unconscious. But what if those awakenings are not coincidental? What if those patterns, the eyes that haunt you in dreams, the voice that unsettles your spine, are echoes of a design beyond your comprehension? This isn't romantic idealism. It is metaphysical realism. Destiny is not fate in the Hollywood sense. It is not the idea that everything happens for a reason, so much as the notion that something deeper than choice or chance is at play when two souls collide. Arthur Schopenhauer, known for his grim view of existence, paradoxically suggested that the will, the metaphysical force behind all things, manifests most powerfully through love. He wrote, "It is not we who choose each other. Love chooses for us." And so we must ask, what if love is not something we discover, but something that's been waiting for us? What if it's a pre-written note in the folds of our being, waiting for the right vibration to unfold it? This is the paradox. Love feels like arrival, but it acts like remembrance. You don't meet the other person, you recognize them. And with that recognition comes terror, because it disrupts every notion of free will and randomness you've been taught to believe in. Jean-Paul Sartre, the father of existentialism, might have scoffed at destiny, championing freedom above all else. Yet even Sartre conceded, freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. Could it be that destiny in love is not the denial of freedom, but its deepest expression? Aldous Huxley warned of love reduced to pleasure and dopamine, calling it the pornography of sentimentality. What remains when the dopamine fades? What remains when compatibility erodes? If there is still a pull, an ache, a longing, a gravitational hum, then perhaps what you've encountered is not merely connection. It is calling. Not romance, but revelation. This is where our journey begins, not in the surface currents of affection, but in the undertow. Not in the compatibility quiz, but in the myth of the soul echoing forward into time. You've been told your whole life that love is a choice. That relationships succeed because two people decide daily to show up for one another. And that's true on one level, the level of practice, of logistics. But what if the deeper level, the place where love begins, exists outside of choice entirely? Imagine standing at a crossroads, every direction rational, every signpost logical. But then there it is again, that feeling. That unspoken pull toward a path you didn't even notice before. It doesn't advertise safety or compatibility. It offers no promises. Yet it burns with the strange warmth of inevitability. What if that path isn't one you found, but one that found you? Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor and existential psychiatrist, once wrote, "What is to give light must endure burning." Love at the level of destiny requires this kind of burning of ego, of illusions, of convenience. It's not the person who completes you in your Instagram captions. It's the one who exposes you, who strips you of your delusions and reveals something you didn't want to see because it's the truth of who you are. In this light, love becomes a confrontation, not with the other, but with yourself. A mirror held to the soul, reflecting not your desires, but your destiny. Destiny is not passive. It is active, invasive, inconvenient. It rearranges everything. It is not the calm meeting of similar values over a glass of wine. It is tectonic, disruptive, divine. If we believe the psyche, as Jung proposed, contains archetypes, timeless, universal structures embedded in our unconscious, then what is love but the triggering of these deep blueprints? Not the surface-level checklist of likes and dislikes, but the geometry of the soul itself, lines that once separated now converging, crossing in an ancient equation. As if love is not about making sense, but about aligning with a pattern older than memory. Nietzsche, often misunderstood as a cynic, offered this paradox in Thus Spoke Zarathustra: one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Love, the destined kind, doesn't come when you've cleaned up your life and filed your fears. It comes in chaos, in incompletion, and it demands something primal from you: surrender. Two people meeting in this space aren't simply connecting. They are activating ancient codes, something encoded in their psychic DNA. They are not falling in love, they are falling into orbit. Think about the geometry of constellations, how stars, light years apart, form images from Earth's perspective. What if souls, scattered across time and space, also form sacred patterns we cannot fully perceive until they align? What if love is the recognition of that celestial alignment? A spark of something pre-human and post-logical? Destiny in love means you don't just feel drawn, you feel undone. It's not a safe harbor, but a storm that awakens your inner compass. And what is destiny if not the unseen architect that carves a path in your bones before you even learn to walk? You think you're choosing love, but maybe, just maybe, it already chose you. There is a particular kind of pain that only love can awaken. A wound so intimate it feels ancient, like it predates your very birth. You don't just fall for someone, you fall through yourself. Through layers of buried memory, forgotten longings, and psychic fractures. What if the person you love most isn't the one who heals you, but the one who reveals where the wounds have always been? The soul doesn't recognize love by comfort. It recognizes it by disturbance. Not because the person harms you, but because their very presence reaches into places you thought were long buried. That's how you know. Not by the pleasure they bring, but by the pain they uncover, the ache of recognition. The subtle suspicion that this moment has already happened. That this isn't new, it's return. Carl Jung believed in the process of individuation, the integration of unconscious aspects of the self into wholeness. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In love, the unconscious rises first not as harmony, but as shadow. The mirror shows you what you denied, disowned, disfigured, and yet, it is precisely this discomfort that suggests something deeper is happening than mere affection. The person you are destined to love will not simply complement your traits. They will complicate your identity. They will interrupt your narrative. Your trajectory will no longer be a straight line. It will curve, collapse, evolve. This is not dysfunction. It is the sacred disruption of destiny. Arthur Schopenhauer, bleak in his view of existence, once argued that the metaphysical will, indifferent, relentless, uses romantic love to further the species. Yet, even he was unsettled by how irrationally powerful romantic obsession could be. Why would nature imbue us with such torment? Because what we call torment may be the soul's attempt to wake itself up. Destined love isn't always smooth. In fact, it rarely is. It's often messy, inconvenient, and chronically mistimed. Teaches not through stability, but through intensity. And that intensity isn't a red flag. It's a signal, not of danger, but of depth. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Hell is other people," but he also admitted that love involves a willingness to be seen through the eyes of another, to become an object in their world. It is terrifying, this exposure. And yet, that vulnerability is where destiny often hides. Not in the illusion of being completed, but in the unbearable truth of being unmasked. The person who is your destiny doesn't just meet your needs. They hold a mirror to your soul's unfinished business. They speak a language you forgot you knew. They bring not answers but questions, existential ones. Why this person? Why now? Why does their absence feel like grief and their presence like home? And so, what we call love might actually be a remembering. The person who haunts your thoughts may not be new. They may be the return of a vow, the echo of a promise made before this life. Not all recognition is visual. Some of it is cellular, psychic, timeless. Destiny speaks not in logic, but in longing. And love, real love, is the ache of that remembering, the sacred wound that finally opens to light. Somewhere in the fabric of the unseen, there exists a thread, a delicate filament, almost imperceptible, stretching between two souls. It defies chronology. It ignores geography. It waits. And when the moment is right, whether through a glance, a conversation, a collision of events, it tugs. Arthur Schopenhauer, bleak in his view of existence, once argued that the metaphysical will, indifferent, relentless, uses romantic love to further the species. Yet even he was unsettled by how irrationally powerful romantic obsession could be. Why would nature imbue us with such torment? Because what we call torment may be the soul's attempt to wake itself up. Destined love isn't always smooth. In fact, it rarely is. It's often messy, inconvenient, and chronically mistimed. It teaches not through stability, but through intensity. And that intensity isn't a red flag, it's a signal. Not of danger, but of depth. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Hell is other people." But he also admitted that love involves a willingness to be seen through the eyes of another, to become an object in their world. It is terrifying, this exposure. And yet, that vulnerability is where destiny often hides, not in the illusion of being completed, but in the unbearable truth of being unmasked. The person who is your destiny doesn't just meet your needs. They hold a mirror to your soul's unfinished business. They speak a language you forgot you knew. They bring not answers, but questions, existential ones. Why this person? Why now? Why does their absence feel like grief and their presence like home? And so, what we call love might actually be a remembering. The person who haunts your thoughts may not be new, they may be the return of a vow, the echo of a promise made before this life. Not all recognition is visual. Some of it is cellular, psychic, timeless. Destiny speaks not in logic, but in longing. And love, real love, is the ache of that remembering, the sacred wound that finally opens to light. Somewhere in the fabric of the unseen, there exists a thread, a delicate filament, almost imperceptible, stretching between two souls. It defies chronology. It ignores geography. It waits. And when the moment is right, whether through a glance, a conversation, a collision of events, it tugs. You might call it fate. You might call it déjà vu. But whatever it is not random. It is memory without origin. It is the soul recognizing not just another, but itself, through the eyes, the voice, the presence of someone who was never truly a stranger. The ancient Greeks called it anamnesis, the idea that knowledge is not something we acquire, but something we remember. Plato believed love was the soul's recollection of beauty it knew before birth. In this way, destiny isn't about foretelling the future. It's about the return of what was already written, already known, in a language the heart never forgot. Have you ever met someone and felt like you were continuing a conversation you began lifetimes ago? The way their words feel like footnotes to your inner monologue. The way silence with them is louder than dialogue with anyone else. This is not infatuation. It is resonance. The tuning fork of the soul vibrating at the exact pitch it always longed for. Nietzsche, with his doctrine of eternal recurrence, asked us to imagine living our lives over and over again, infinitely. Every choice, every love, every pain, repeating. If that is true, then perhaps the people who break us open in this life have done so before. And perhaps we choose them again, not because we are foolish, but because we are faithful. Faithful to a pattern deeper than logic. Faithful to a vow etched into time's own pulse. Viktor Frankl spoke of the human search for meaning as the core of our existence. But meaning is rarely found in safety. It erupts in disruption. And no disruption is more holy or more devastating than destined love. The love that shatters your life plan, not to harm it, but to return you to who you were before the world made you forget. Sometimes the love you're meant for doesn't come gently. It doesn't arrive when you're ready. It arrives when your soul is finally exhausted enough to stop resisting its own truth. And when it does, you'll know. Not because it makes sense, but because it unravels you beautifully, irreversibly. Jean Cocteau once said, "Love is not something you feel. It is something you recognize." That recognition is the touch point of destiny. It's why a single conversation can feel like home. Why a shared silence can feel like worship. It's not just about being seen, it's about being remembered in a world that thrives on forgetting. Destiny weaves quietly. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It moves through dreams, through timing too precise to be coincidence, through heartbreaks that felt senseless until they cleared the path. The invisible thread isn't a fantasy. It is the architecture beneath everything we think is chance. And so, when that thread pulls, when the ache of recognition becomes unbearable, you are not being cursed. You are being summoned. There comes a moment, often unannounced, when everything you thought you knew about love collapses. It may not look extraordinary on the surface. Maybe it's just a passing moment, an offhand glance, a fleeting phrase, an encounter that shouldn't have meant anything. But it does. Something breaks open. The air shifts. You feel it in your chest, the sense that your entire life has just been rearranged by a presence you barely understand. This is the divine interruption. Not divine in a religious sense, but in the sense of magnitude of cosmic weight. It doesn't arrive with clarity. It arrives with chaos. It does not ask for permission. It demands surrender. And here lies the paradox: even in a love governed by destiny, choice still matters. Not the choice to fall, that part is inevitable, but the choice to yield. To stop fighting the pull. To stop managing your feelings like a budget and start listening to them like scripture. You may not choose who arrives, but you choose whether to respond. Aldous Huxley warned that modern culture often degrades love into something ornamental, a series of gestures and phrases that disguise fear as intimacy. But destined love doesn't fit inside culture. It disrupts it. It is the wilderness within the civilized. The soul's refusal to be negotiated with. It's easy to talk about love as destiny when it's romantic, when the timing is right, when the world applauds. But what happens when destiny is inconvenient? When it arrives in the middle of other commitments, other identities? What if it destroys more than it preserves? This is when love ceases to be a story and becomes a reckoning. The person who appears in this way doesn't flatter your ego. They dismantle it. They don't stabilize your identity. They fracture it so the truth can emerge. You are not meant to remain the same after meeting them. You are meant to disintegrate into something raw, something holy, something real. Viktor Frankl reminded us that meaning arises when suffering is no longer senseless. In that light, the pain that often accompanies a destined love is not punishment. It is preparation. It is the soul's breaking so that something larger can emerge. You bleed, not because you are weak, but because the armor you wore your whole life finally cracked in the presence of what was meant for you. And what does one do with such a meeting? You surrender, not passively but sacredly. You stop asking for guarantees. You stop waiting for logic to catch up. You allow yourself to become porous, to listen to the language of the body, the dreams, the intuitive fragments that tell you, this isn't ordinary. Nietzsche said, become who you are. And maybe that's what destined love really is, a call to become the self that only this love can reveal. Not because the other person completes you, but because their existence activates the part of you that was dormant. They are not the reason you become whole. They are the catalyst. So when the divine interruption comes, when your life is pierced by the unbearable clarity of recognition, you will be faced with the only choice that matters: to pretend it was coincidence or to surrender to what your soul already knows. There are certain truths so deeply etched into the architecture of the soul that time itself becomes irrelevant. You do not move on from them. You revolve around them as the earth revolves around the sun, constantly, faithfully, often unknowingly. Love, when it is of destiny, is one such truth. It does not disappear. It transforms. It hibernates, it reincarnates, it changes form, but it never ceases. You may part ways. Lives may unfold in opposite directions. Decades may pass, but the pull remains. It's not memory, it's frequency. You are tuned to them and they to you. Even if the mind forgets, the soul remembers. And when you least expect it, through a name, a song, a city, a scent, it returns. Not to torment, but to remind you that something real once passed between you. And real things don't end. They echo. Arthur Schopenhauer, despite his philosophical pessimism, acknowledged a mysterious force behind romantic longing, a metaphysical drive that pulls two people toward each other not for pleasure or harmony, but for something ancient and unexplainable. He did not call it love. But perhaps that's because love, real love, defies naming. It is not a feeling. It is a vow. One made long before you arrived here in flesh and time. And so, if you are haunted by a love that refuses to fade, know this: you are not broken. You are not irrational. You are simply listening to something that most people spend their lives silencing: the call of the eternal return. Nietzsche's concept was that life repeats infinitely. But what if it's not just life? What if it's love that returns again and again, in different forms, across different lifetimes, trying to complete a story left unfinished? The person you are destined for is not your reward. They are your reflection. They arrive not to ease your path, but to remind you of it. Their presence may not bring peace. It may awaken war within you. but it is a holy war, a necessary breaking so that you can remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. Jean-Paul Sartre might have said, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But even he could not fully outrun the mystery of the other, the one whose gaze defines, destabilizes, and transforms. We are not made in isolation. We are born, again and again, through the mirror of another's eyes. And if you lose them, if circumstance or fear or time rips you apart, the thread remains. Perhaps you meet again, perhaps in this life, perhaps in another. Destiny doesn't operate on human timelines. It waits, patiently, silently, faithfully. So what do you do with such love? In a world that demands certainty and measurable outcomes, you honor it. You don't reduce it to closure or conquest. You don't try to box it into roles or titles. You let it change you. You let it build altars in the quiet places of your being. You let it write poems in your blood. Because it was never just about romance. It was about revelation. In the end, destiny is not about endings. It is about becoming. And love, the real kind, the rare kind, is the hand that reaches through the veil again and again to remind you, you are not lost. You are returning.